This question includes some advanced punctuation marks that can be kind of intimidating, but I think most of us get this right because we've seen similar situations before, and we know that the double dash is kind of a thing, okay? So we see here's a dash right here, so okay, we'll have a second one. But I do want to explain why that's correct, because it won't always be the case that we use two dashes. Sometimes we'll use one. In fact, the dash is actually a very versatile punctuation mark. It can kind of stand in for any of the other punctuation marks. So we won't always see the same kinds of usages for it. So it's still about sentence structure. So if we predict the question and we do this the more formulaic way, we should be able to look at these choices and say, I still need to think about sentence structure because it's about the punctuation, and that's what punctuation does. So if I'm thinking of the sentence structure, I can see right away the word indeed is an extra thing, right? It's that comma showing me I'm starting off with this little intro word, and that's okay. But what else is going on? When we think about animals depicted in well-known works of art, well, that's also an intro clause. So we've got two introductory clauses starting the sentence. Then we get to the main sentence itself. The image of dogs playing poker. Now, that's not a full sentence. It's just kind of I guess, not an intro, but it's the subject. It's the topic of the sentence. But we haven't gotten to the action yet. That's because the dash is letting us leave the sentence temporarily so that we can describe this image of dogs playing poker and give us more information about it. It's kind of functioning like an appositive, which we usually use commas to separate. And I'll talk about why we wouldn't in this case in a second. But then we get back to the sentence. The image of dogs playing poker may be the first and only one that comes to mind. So notice how when I leave everything out of the sentence, all that pink, the green still sounds like a sentence. It sounds like a complete thought. And so that's what we're trying to pay attention to and think about all the other stuff. How is it interacting? And so what we've done here with the, let's change this to yellow a little bit so I can talk about it more easily. So what we're talking about with this yellow, this piece between the dashes, is that is an interruption. And it's functioning like a positive. It's kind of describing what we're doing. And normally we would use commas to kind of separate that out from the main sentence. The reason you might use a dash, a lot of it is just personal choice. You might like the way the dash looks. There might just be a lot going on. And I think that that's what's going on here, is there's already so many commas in this sentence that the author has chosen to use dashes because they're just visually distinctive. And so it's a little easier to follow this broken up green sentence when we have different punctuation marks that we're using to kind of show what is getting in the way of that main sentence. I guess they could have used commas. One reason that we don't use commas sometimes for these like extra clauses is when the clause itself includes a comma. So that sometimes happens when we're like we're inserting a list into the middle of the sentence. Then we might use dashes because there's just way too many commas. So that's the thing with dashes, is it's not usually the case that we must use a dash. It's usually a choice. And on the SAT, where there must be a right answer, that seems difficult. But we still are going to be limited by the other wrong answers. And so when a dash is correct, it's very often because everything else is wrong. And so in this case, we wouldn't use a semicolon, because we're not splitting apart a sentence, right? There's green on either side. That's the one sentence. We can't chop that up with a semicolon. We also wouldn't use a comma, like what's there, because when we do this interruption, we want there to be symmetry, right? If we're going to leave the sentence with some sort of punctuation mark, some sort of way to show the interruption, we want to return to the sentence in the same way, right? We want our reader to know, oh, this is where the extra begins, this is where the extra ends. And so we could use two commas in other situations, but here, if we're going to use a dash at the beginning, we'd better use one at the end. So it forces our hand, and that's why we often see the double dash as a way to punctuate sentences. But there's reasons behind it. And there will be cases where we add on an extra clause, but because it's at the end of the sentence, we don't use a second dash because the second dash is really a period. So there might be cases where there's only one dash. So be prepared. It will happen at some point in your practice, I promise.